Stop where you are. Officer Vance Mercer's voice cut through the night air like artillery fire, his flashlight beam stabbing the darkness. To him, her youth meant nothing. Her confusion? Just another excuse to escalate. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he demanded, hand already resting on his holster. "I live here," she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "My dad's house is right there." "Yeah, right. You people always have some story," Officer Lamont sneered from the patrol car window. The movement was innocent, reaching for her phone, but to them it was a threat. 2 shots cracked the night. Her body crumpled to the pavement. They thought they were neutralizing a threat. Instead, they'd ignited a war. Because she wasn't just another victim, she was Command Sergeant Major Elijah Warrick's only daughter. Now he sits in the military hospital watching her fight for life. No tears, no words, just calculation. What happens when a Delta Force operator, trained in 27 ways to kill, discovers who shot his child? How will the officers react when they learn whose daughter lies bleeding on life support? Will their badges protect them from a father's surgical vengeance? And what price will the entire department pay for their deadly mistake? Follow this explosive story to witness justice served by the deadliest hands in America. The upscale neighborhood of Oak Ridge Heights sat on the outskirts of Morris County, its streets lined with towering oak trees and custom-built homes. This was no ordinary suburb. It was where military brass, federal judges, and corporate executives lived behind tasteful security systems and well-manicured lawns. The community was predominantly white, with just a handful of black families who'd earned their place through distinguished service or exceptional achievement. The evening air hung heavy with early summer humidity as 19-year-old Zora Warrick walked the familiar path home from her summer job at the local library. Streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, cicadas providing nature's soundtrack to her journey. She wore simple clothes, jeans, sneakers, and a university hoodie, with her natural hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her earbuds played Coltrane, a musical education instilled by her father. Command Sergeant Major Elijah Warrick had purchased their home 5 years earlier after his 3rd deployment with Delta Force, America's elite counterterrorism unit. At 43, his service record read like classified fiction. Hostage rescues in 7 countries, counterterrorism operations across 4 continents, and training exercises with every major Allied Special Forces unit. His military bearing remained evident even in civilian clothes, his 6'2" frame carrying the weight of countless classified operations with disciplined posture and watchful eyes. The Warrick home represented everything he'd fought for: security, stability, and a future for Zora, who'd already been accepted to Johns Hopkins pre-med program. The two had been inseparable since his wife's death from cancer 8 years prior. Their bond was forged through grief and strengthened by shared resilience. While Zora walked home that night, officers Vance Mercer and Lamont conducted what they called preventative patrol through Oak Ridge Heights. Both white men in their 30s, they'd transferred from a rougher precinct 6 months earlier, bringing their aggressive tactics to this quieter beat. Mercer, the senior officer with 12 years on the force, had 3 excessive force complaints quietly buried in his personnel file. Lamont, 7 years his junior, was eager to prove himself through the same confrontational approach. Their cruiser moved slowly through the neighborhood, headlights off, looking for what Mercer called opportunities for intervention. When they spotted a young black woman walking alone, Mercer nudged his partner. "Doesn't look like she belongs here," he muttered, flicking on the spotlight. "Let's check this out." Neither officer could have imagined the catastrophic chain of events their intervention would unleash, nor the lethal caliber of man they were about to make an enemy of. The police cruiser accelerated silently behind Zora, its spotlight suddenly flooding her path with harsh white light. She turned, momentarily blinded, instinctively raising a hand to shield her eyes. The car stopped abruptly, driver's door swinging open before the engine died. "Hey, stop right there," Officer Mercer called out, his tone already aggressive as he approached with a practiced swagger. Officer Lamont remained half-seated in the passenger side, hand resting casually on his sidearm. Zora removed her earbuds, confusion crossing her face. "Is something wrong, officer?" Her voice carried the measured calm her father had taught her for encounters with authority. Always respectful, never confrontational, hands visible. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Mercer demanded, circling her slowly like a predator assessing prey. His flashlight beam traced her from head to toe, lingering uncomfortably. "I live here. My dad's house is 3 doors down," Zora replied, pointing toward the colonial-style home with the American flag displayed prominently in the front yard. "I'm just coming back from work at the library," Mercer scoffed. "Library closes at 8. It's nearly 10. His disbelief was palpable, clearly assuming she was lying. "I'm on the evening cleanup shift. We lock up at 9:30, Zora explained, maintaining her composure despite the growing knot in her stomach. She'd been warned about these situations by her father countless times. Officer Lamont emerged from the cruiser now, approaching with his hand still resting on his weapon. "Got any ID on you?" he asked, positioning himself to her left, creating the flanking formation they'd used countless times in higher crime areas. "Yes, in my pocket," Zora answered, slowly reaching toward her back pocket. "I'm just getting my wallet." "Show me your hands," Mercer suddenly shouted, his entire demeanor shifting from suspicious to threatening in an instant. His weapon cleared its holster in one fluid motion. The miscommunication happened in milliseconds. Zora continued reaching for her ID. Mercer saw only threat. Lamont, following his partner's lead, drew his weapon as well. 2 gunshots shattered the suburban quiet. Zora's expression registered shock before pain, her body crumpling to the pavement as neighborhood dogs began to bark in the distance. Command Sergeant Major Elijah Warrick was reviewing classified operation plans when his doorbell rang with unusual urgency. Opening his front door revealed Police Chief Warren Livingston, a man he'd met at community functions but never personally engaged with. The chief's ashen face told Warrick everything before a word was spoken. "Mr. Warrick," Livingston began, his voice unsteady, "there's been an incident involving your daughter." The 23 years of military discipline held Warwick's physical reaction in check, but his eyes darkened to obsidian. "Where is she?" The question emerged with lethal quietness. "County Medical Center, Trauma Unit." Livingston couldn't maintain eye contact. "I'll drive you myself." The ride passed in silence, Warwick's mind already calculating, assessing, planning, the same mental process he employed before high-risk operations. Only by the hospital entrance did he ask the question, "Your officers?" Livingston nodded almost imperceptibly. "There was a misunderstanding. They thought she was reaching for a weapon." Warwick's restraint was surgical. "Their names." "Sergeant, I understand your anger. Their names." Each syllable carried the weight of a precision strike. The chief hesitated before surrendering the information. "Officers Mercer and Lamont." Inside the trauma center, doctors worked frantically over Zora's body. 2 bullets had torn through her torso, collapsing a lung and lacerating her liver. Warrick stood at the observation window, his face an impenetrable mask as medical staff fought to save his daughter's life. Only he noticed the single tear that escaped down his weathered cheek. Only he knew the oath he silently made to his dying child. The police department's conference room hummed with tension as Chief Livingston addressed his command staff at 3 a.m. 2 officers involved, 1 victim, female, 19 years old, critical condition. He paused, letting the gravity settle. Her father is Command Sergeant Major Elijah Warrick, Delta Force. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Captain Rhodes, a former Army Ranger, whispered, "Jesus Christ." "Body cams?" asked Internal Affairs Director Harmond. "Conveniently malfunctioning," Livingston replied bitterly. "Both officers claim she reached for something in her pocket after being instructed not to move." Rhodes shook his head. "If she dies and her father believes it wasn't justified." The unfinished sentence hung in the air like a grenade with its pin removed. The fluorescent lights of County Medical Center's ICU waiting room cast everyone in the same sickly pallor. But Command Sergeant Major Warrick seemed carved from something darker and denser than the civilians around him. He sat alone despite the growing crowd, military colleagues who'd arrived without being called, neighbors who'd heard the shots, and Zora's tearful friends clutching each other for support. Doctors had stabilized her through the night, but their prognosis remained guarded. "The next 48 hours are critical," the trauma surgeon had told him. "One bullet fractured 2 ribs, collapsed her right lung, and stopped millimeters from her spine. The second tore through her liver. She's young and strong, but her body has suffered severe trauma." Warrick acknowledged the information with a single nod, his tactical mind automatically calculating survival probabilities as he'd done for wounded teammates in combat zones across the globe. But this wasn't a teammate. This was his Zora, his only child, the living legacy of his late wife, Amara. 3 miles away at police headquarters, Officers Mercer and Lamont sat in separate interview rooms as Internal Affairs constructed their official narrative. Captain Julia Harmond, a 20-year veteran known for her strict adherence to protocol, reviewed their hastily written statements with thinning patience. "Let me understand this," she said to Officer Mercer, tapping his report with a pen. "You spotted a young woman walking alone, decided she looked suspicious, despite having no reports of criminal activity in the area, and initiated contact without calling in the stop to dispatch." Mercer shifted uncomfortably. "The neighborhood has had break-ins." "Not for 8 months, Harmond corrected, "and those perpetrators were identified as 3 white males in their 20s. "She reached for something," Mercer insisted, a flush creeping up his neck, "after we told her not to move." Harmond consulted her notes. "According to your own statement, you asked for identification, which would require her to reach for her wallet." "It wasn't like that," Mercer insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Lamont saw it, too. She made a sudden movement. We had to make a split-second decision." In the adjacent room, Officer Lamont was crumbling under similar questioning. "I followed Mercer's lead," he repeated. "He drew first. I thought he saw a weapon." By dawn, Chief Livingston had assembled a crisis management team, including the department's legal counsel, public information officer, and union representative. The initial press statement was carefully constructed. Officers responded to suspicious activity and were involved in a shooting incident. The individual is currently hospitalized. The officers have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. No further details at this time. What they didn't include was the frantic background check they'd run on Command Sergeant Major Warrick. Most of his service record was classified, but what they could access sent chills through the department. Multiple combat deployments, expert in close quarters combat, advanced training in every weapon system in the American arsenal and many foreign ones. Commendations signed by 3 different presidents. "He's not just military," the intelligence officer explained. "He's the tip of the spear, the guy they send when they need to solve impossible problems in impossible places." Back at the hospital, Warrick received visitors with restrained courtesy but minimal engagement. His attention remained focused on the ICU doors and the monitors visible through the observation window. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Daniels, Warwick's commanding officer, arrived shortly before noon, still in uniform from a Pentagon briefing. "The unit's behind you, Elijah," he said quietly, the only person brave enough to sit directly beside the command sergeant major. "Whatever you need." Warrick spoke for the first time in hours, his voice low and controlled. "I need to understand why 2 police officers shot my daughter for walking home." "There will be an investigation," Daniels offered. "There are 2 kinds of investigations," Warrick replied, the cold precision in his voice making nearby conversations falter. "The kind they control and the kind I conduct." Daniels recognized the look in his subordinate's eyes, the same calculating assessment he'd witnessed before particularly dangerous missions. "Elijah, I know what you're thinking, but this isn't Kandahar or Damascus. There are systems in place." "The system," Warrick interrupted, "is why my daughter is fighting for her life with 2 bullets in her body instead of safe in her bed. Their system failed her the moment those officers decided she didn't belong in her own neighborhood." Before Daniels could respond, a doctor emerged through the ICU doors, surgical mask still hanging around his neck, eyes searching the room until they locked on Warrick's imposing figure. The command sergeant major stood, every muscle tensed for news that would determine whether justice would be sought through legal channels or by other means entirely. "She's stabilized, but not out of danger," Dr. Nakamura explained, gesturing Warrick toward the ICU. "She's asking for you." Entering the sterile room, Warrick's battle-hardened composure nearly broke at the sight of his daughter. Zora lay connected to monitors and tubes, her skin ashen against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached, recognition bringing a weak smile to her face. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not your fault." Warrick took her hand gently, mindful of the IV lines. "I should have protected you. You taught me everything, right?" Her words came between labored breaths. "I just reached for my ID. They didn't even warn me." The heart monitor's steady beeping punctuated her struggle to speak. Warrick leaned closer, memorizing each detail of her account as she described the officer's approach, their aggressive tone, the confusion before the shots. "I wasn't threatening, just showing ID." Her eyes closed with exhaustion, but her grip on his hand tightened. "Promise me, no war." Before Warrick could respond, alarms erupted from the monitors. Dr. Nakamura rushed in with a trauma team, shouting orders as they pushed Warrick aside. "She's hemorrhaging. Get him out of here." In the hallway, Warrick stood motionless as medical personnel rushed past him. Lieutenant Colonel Daniels approached cautiously, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Elijah." "They're lying." Warwick's voice had transformed into something terrifying in its control. "She reached for her ID because they asked for it. No warning before they fired." Daniels nodded grimly. "I've been making calls. The department's narrative is already falling apart. 2 witnesses in houses nearby saw the whole thing. They're saying the officers escalated without cause." "Names," Warrick said. "Of the witnesses?" "The officers, their full names, addresses, and schedules. I want to know everything about them." Daniels hesitated. "What are you planning?" Warwick's eyes met his commanding officer's with unsettling clarity. "Justice, through proper channels, for now." Before Daniels could respond, Dr. Nakamura emerged from the ICU, surgical mask pulled down, blood visible on his gown. "We've stabilized her again, but she's slipped into a coma. The next 12 hours are critical." Warrick nodded once, decision made. He turned to Daniels. "I need a secure phone and 1 hour uninterrupted." As a father, he'd promised his daughter no war. As a Delta operator, he knew sometimes war was the only path to justice. But first, he would give the system one chance to work. One chance only. Within hours of Warwick's calls, the hospital's security dynamics shifted imperceptibly. 3 unremarkable men in civilian clothes appeared in the waiting room and corridors, former Delta operators who'd served under Warrick in operations too classified to name. They moved with the practiced casualness that only came from years of covert surveillance, their eyes constantly scanning, assessing, protecting. Bryson Weathers, a former intelligence specialist now working for a private security firm, set up an improvised command center in an unused hospital conference room. On his laptop screen, personnel files and incident reports appeared faster than any legitimate Freedom of Information request could produce them. Officers Vance Mercer and Davis Lamont, Weathers briefed Warrick quietly. Mercer, 12 years on the force, transferred from South District 6 months ago. 3 excessive force complaints, all dismissed. Lamont, 5 years, followed Mercer from the same precinct. 1 shooting incident ruled justified, though the victim was unarmed. Warrick absorbed the information with clinical detachment. Their movements since the shooting, both placed on administrative leave, standard procedure. Mercer's holed up at his apartment, blinds drawn. Lamont's staying with his brother-in-law on West Side. They've been instructed not to discuss the case, even with each other. Across town, Isaiah Robertson, a retired JAG officer and current civil rights attorney, entered the police headquarters with a court order in hand. Chief Livingston received him in strained silence as Robertson laid out his demands: all body camera footage, dispatch recordings, and witness statements from the shooting. The department has 24 hours to comply, Robertson stated calmly. After that, we'll add evidence tampering to the civil rights violation claims. Livingston's face tightened. There may be technical issues with the body camera footage. Technical issues with both officers' cameras on the same night? Robertson's expression remained professionally neutral. That would be statistically remarkable, especially given the 3 nearby residential security cameras that my investigative team has already secured footage from. The blood drained from Livingston's face. Meanwhile, Jackson Cooper, the 3rd member of Warrick's impromptu team and former Delta communications specialist, was interviewing neighbors near the shooting scene. Dressed in a utility company uniform, he captured statements on a concealed recording device. They didn't give her a chance. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman whose bedroom window overlooked the scene, whispered. I heard them shout, but she was just standing there with her hands visible. Then they shot her. By nightfall, the team reconvened at the hospital. Zora remained in critical condition, her status unchanged. Warrick listened to their reports with the same focused attention he'd given mission briefings in combat zones. The system is already closing ranks, Weathers concluded. Internal Affairs is building a narrative about poor visibility and threatening movements. Warrick nodded once. Then we apply pressure where they're weakest. He turned to Robertson. File the civil rights case tomorrow. Name the officers, the chief, and the department. Maximum visibility. And if that doesn't work? Cooper asked quietly. Warrick's eyes held the cold calculation of a man who'd eliminated high-value targets across multiple continents. Then we moved to Plan B. The civil rights lawsuit hit like a precision strike. By noon, every major news network carried the story. Delta Force commander's daughter shot by police while reaching for ID. The security camera footage, strategically leaked by Robertson's team, showed Zora clearly stating she was retrieving her identification before the officers opened fire. Officer Lamont cracked first. Isolated in his brother-in-law's spare bedroom, watching the coverage unfold, he called Internal Affairs Director Harmond. I need to amend my statement, he said, voice trembling. It didn't happen like Mercer said. In a sterile interview room, Lamont's new testimony flowed like a confession. She was complying with our request for ID. Mercer was on edge from the start, convinced she was up to something because... He paused, shame evident on his face. Because she was black in that neighborhood. When she reached for her wallet, he shouted and fired. I reacted to his shot, not to any threat she posed. Across town, Officer Mercer received a call from the police union representative. Lamont's flipped. They've got security footage. The narrative's falling apart. Mercer slammed his fist into the wall. That little bitch should have kept her hands where I could see them. That little bitch is a Delta Force commander's daughter, the rep hissed, and she might die. The department's cutting you loose. Best I can negotiate is a plea deal if you take full responsibility. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Zora's condition improved marginally. She's fighting, Dr. Nakamura told Warrick. Brain activity is strong. Warrick nodded, allowing himself the first moment of hope since the shooting. His team continued building pressure. Robertson on legal fronts, Weathers through intelligence gathering, and Cooper maintaining surveillance on the officers. That evening, Chief Livingston requested a private meeting with Warrick. Daniels accompanied him as they convened in the same conference room the department had used for damage control days earlier. "We're filing criminal charges against Mercer," Livingston stated without preamble. "Attempted manslaughter. Lamont will be charged with filing false reports in exchange for testimony." "Not enough," Warrick replied evenly. Livingston shifted uncomfortably. "The DA won't go for murder charges without—" "This isn't just about charges," Warrick interrupted. "It's about the culture that made them think they could shoot my daughter without consequence. I want departmental reform, independent oversight, retraining. And Mercer doesn't just lose his badge, he serves time." Their eyes locked in silent combat until Livingston finally nodded. "I'll take it to the mayor and police commission." "Good," Warrick responded, standing to leave, "because Plan B would have been considerably less pleasant for everyone involved." The grand jury indictment came down like a hammer. Officer Vance Mercer was charged with first-degree assault, civil rights violations, and attempted voluntary manslaughter. Officer Davis Lamont received lesser charges of filing false reports and official misconduct in exchange for his testimony. Chief Livingston, sensing the changing winds, announced his early retirement the same day. Warrick watched the news conference from Zora's hospital room, where she had finally awakened from her coma 3 days earlier. Still weak, but improving daily, she squeezed her father's hand as the charges were announced. "Is this enough?" she asked, her voice stronger than days before. Warrick considered the question carefully. "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about change." The trial of Officer Mercer became a national spectacle. Security camera footage played repeatedly for the jury showed Zora clearly stating she was reaching for ID before the officers opened fire. Lamont's testimony proved devastating, confirming that racial bias had influenced their approach from the beginning. "Mercer said, 'She doesn't belong here,' before we even spoke to her," Lamont testified. "We had no reason to stop her other than she was black in a white neighborhood." The defense attempted to paint Mercer as a dedicated officer, making a split-second decision in a potentially dangerous situation, but the evidence overwhelmed their narrative. The prosecution methodically dismantled every claim of reasonable fear or procedural justification. Zora's testimony, delivered from a wheelchair as she continued her recovery, silenced the courtroom. She described her lifelong instruction from her father about how to interact with police. Hands visible, voice calm, no sudden movements, complete compliance. Her voice broke only once, when describing the moment she realized she'd been shot simply for following an officer's request. Meanwhile, Warrick worked with Robertson on the larger reform package. The city council, faced with overwhelming evidence of departmental failure, approved a civilian oversight board with subpoena power. Mandatory body cameras with automatic upload features would prevent technical malfunctions. De-escalation training would be required quarterly rather than annually. When the guilty verdict was announced, Mercer showed no emotion. The judge, unswayed by defense pleas for leniency, sentenced him to 12 years in prison. Lamont received 3 years probation and was permanently barred from law enforcement. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Warrick and Zora. One shouted above the others, "Command Sergeant Major, do you feel justice has been served?" Warrick looked at his daughter, now standing with assistance but growing stronger each day. "Justice isn't a moment," he replied. "It's a process. Today, we took a step forward." Later that evening, in the privacy of their home, Lieutenant Colonel Daniels raised a glass with Warrick on their back patio. "You could have gone another way," he observed quietly. "Used your skills differently." Warwick's gaze drifted to where Zora sat reading inside. "She asked me not to start a war," he said simply. "So instead, we changed a system." 1 year later, Zora Warrick stood at a podium before the graduating class of the county's police academy. Her recovery had been grueling. Months of physical therapy to regain full mobility, psychological counseling to manage PTSD, and deferred medical studies while she healed. Yet here she stood, addressing the first class trained under the new reforms her case had sparked. "Your badge is not power," she told them, her voice clear and confident. "It is responsibility. Each of you will face moments where bias could cloud your judgment. In those moments, remember my story." In the audience, Command Sergeant Major Warrick watched with quiet pride. The incident had changed them both. Her career path had shifted from medicine to law, while he had retired from active duty to focus on police reform advocacy nationwide. Officer Lamont sat in the back row attendant as part of his probation requirements. The haunted look in his eyes spoke of a man still reckoning with his failures, but seeking redemption through education rather than denial. After the ceremony, Mayor Richardson approached Warrick. "The Oversight Commission is making a difference. Complaints down 60%. Use of force incidents down 70%. Warrick nodded. "Systems can change when properly motivated." Later that evening, father and daughter sat on their porch, watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight. Zora's acceptance letter to Georgetown Law School lay on the table between them. "Sometimes justice comes from unlikely places," she reflected, "even from terrible events." Warrick placed his hand over hers. "Justice isn't just what happens in courtrooms, it's what we build afterward." In the distance, a police cruiser drove slowly past their home. The officer inside raised a respectful hand in greeting, not in fear, but in recognition of the new standard they all now served.